High refresh rate. Why didn't Apple include it in the latest iPhones? There's a very clear reason. And what's the truth about high refresh rate in 2020? This is a clip from the latest podcast episode. Let's hop in. One thing that Apple didn't include this year is high refresh rate, and that was one thing that people really thought they were going to. High refresh rate and 5G are like the two main technologies right now that are changing the industry, and they're on the forefront. Those are like the two main things that you see companies market and stuff. So I think we should talk about like why Apple didn't include high refresh rate, and then also why all these manufacturers are, and kind of like the truth about it, because every single phone that I've used this year, for the most part, I would say like 80 to 90% of them have high refresh rate.
Yeah.
And Apple's still on 60 hertz. So high refresh rate, basically for anyone that doesn't know, is the amount of times that the screen refreshes. So Apple's is 60 hertz. A lot of the phones are 90 hertz or 120. When people game, oftentimes they'll have a higher refresh rate display because it means lower latency and less motion blur and things like that.
Mm-hmm.
The immediate question is like, why does it matter in 2020? And I think it matters because we're kind of hitting, in a way, like the peak innovation for the rectangular phone, right? Like,
yeah.
We have the foldable, we have the swivel. Like, there are a bunch of innovations in the form factors of phones.
Oh, yeah.
But if we're just talking about, like, a slab, right? If we're just talking about, like, rectangle, then there's not as many places to innovate, right? You can innovate in the camera. You can innovate in the battery life, which it feels like they should be doing a lot more than they are. You can innovate in the speakers and the material choice. Like, there are small areas to innovate, but manufacturers want something to like show a visual example of, and it's really hard to show a visual example of increasing the aperture size or something like that. Like it can be done, but with high refresh rate, it's really easy to make a commercial and put 60 hertz on one side and 120 hertz on the other, and scroll and show this is what you will be getting. It will look a lot smoother. Show someone losing a game because it wasn't fast enough. Like, there are really visual ways to market this. And I think that's why the companies are doing it. And it's also an arena where, like, they can innovate and it can get a little bit better every year. Whereas they're not going to put a 4K display in a phone. We already tried that. No one cared. Didn't work. I think that that's, like, why it's happening and why it matters. But I think we should talk a little bit about why Apple didn't include it and kind of where we think it's going. So do you have any, like, hot takes on why Apple didn't include it?
Honestly, I think one of the reasons they didn't include it is because they didn't need to. I'll be very, very honest with you. Like if they were to include it, they'd do exactly what they did with ProMotion. They would make it that they would essentially just put ProMotion and adapt it to the iPhone. And actually, funny enough, I was literally just doing homework. I was doing an assignment on my iPad before we did this call, before we started recording the podcast. And I think I was just on not Instagram. I was on Twitter, I think maybe. And I'm just scrolling, and I ended up switching back to my note-taking app, GoodNotes. And then I start seeing all this lag and like all this like choppiness in how I'm zooming and zooming out. I close the app, restart it, and it's working fine. Here's the thing. If it's going to be choppy, I'm not going to like it. But if it's like already smooth enough on my phone where I can zoom in, zoom out, and I'm not really seeing anything that's not like bugging me, I don't mind it. And I feel like most consumers aren't going to care enough about a higher refresh rate screen versus like 5G. And I think that's a huge thing for this year. Because they were able to introduce 5G, they're like, okay, we don't really need to introduce anything else mind-blowing this year. We can work better on our ProMotion, and then we can make it even better. Maybe make it 260 hertz next year. And be like, boom, like, we didn't come out with 120 like everyone else. No, we didn't do 90 like everyone else. No, we're doing 240, 260, something like that. And I feel like that's what they're going to end up doing.
I think that's totally valid. I also think it's like three other things. I think the first thing is literally what you just said, like with the 5G. They want to leave. I think it's two things. Sorry, I'm all over the place. I have so many thoughts about this.
All good,
I think the first thing is 5G is already going to tank the battery life a bit.
Oh, yeah.
It takes a lot more power. High refresh rate also consumes a lot of power, which is why we see phones like the Pixel do dynamic high refresh rate, where it will alternate between the 90 or 120 and then go back down to 60, like when it doesn't feel you need that. So Apple's already putting in one technology that hits their battery life, and they put in less battery capacity than they did last year. So there's already like two things at play that are going to hurt the battery life, right? Now, if you put a third one in, like, you're really playing with fire a bit. Like, in order to include higher refresh rate and 5G, they really need to make sure that the battery is there, because that's something that will easily affect the consumer's life. And they'll easily notice if the phone is getting bad battery life, whereas a smaller percentage will notice the higher refresh rate. A lot of them will notice it subconsciously, but like a smaller percentage of them will be like, my phone is so smooth, in comparison to the percentage that's being like, my phone is dying at 10 a.m. So I think that's like the first thing. I think the second thing is like, they, again, as I just said, there isn't a ton of innovation that you can really do in a rectangle that feels huge every year, because it takes a long time to like innovate, right? So they don't want to waste two huge marketing points, I think, in 1 year. Like, I think that they're much better off putting 5G, having that be the forefront of all the commercials, And then next year, they can use ProMotion and market it that way because, again, they want to show visual things, and that's really visual. So I think they're kind of like saving it for next year because like they're going to sell these, as you said, without that. And then I think the third reason why is like Apple doesn't want to include technology in their phone if the benefits don't outweigh the compromises. So like there are some compromises with 120 hertz. It would be more expensive to produce, and they're trying to create an option this year that's more budget friendly. We see that with like the iPhone 12 being like very similar to the 12 Pro. So they don't want to create like a huge discrepancy in between the two. Like they stress the fact that the displays are the same between the 12 and the 12 Pro.